The hospital never fully slept. Even at this hour, the corridors carried a low, constant pressure. Machines breathing for patients, carts rolling, voices kept deliberately calm. Fluorescent lights washed everything into the same pale color, flattening faces, hiding fatigue. On the fourth floor, where the trauma wing met long-term care, the nurse moved without urgency. Her badge swung lightly against her chest as she adjusted an IV line, checked a monitor, and stepped back before the alarm could finish forming its sound. She had learned the building's rhythms long ago. Which doors closed too slowly, which elevators paused an extra second between floors, which hallways amplified noise, and which swallowed it. None of this was written in policy. It lived in muscle memory, the kind that came from repetition and attention, not authority. At the nurse's station, a junior resident argued quietly with a charge nurse about bed availability. Voices rose, then fell. The nurse passed them without comment, already aware of the outcome. There would be no beds. There never were when the day shift ran long and the night shift arrived short. She noted it the way she noted everything else, filed it away, and kept moving. A stretcher rolled in from the elevator bank, pushed by two orderlies who were moving faster than their expressions suggested. Not an emergency yet. Not officially. The nurse glanced at the patient's face, then at the hands. No tremor. No restraints. The chart clipped to the rail was thin. She slowed her pace for half a second, just long enough to catch the way one orderly avoided eye contact. She said nothing and let them pass. Down the hall, security had gathered near the entrance doors, shoulders squared, radios clipped high. Someone important was arriving. The nurse could tell by the way people adjusted themselves without being told, smoothing uniforms, standing a little straighter. A federal agent stepped through the doors moments later, coat open, expression already set to mild impatience. He scanned the space the way people did when they believed they understood it. His eyes moved over the nurse without stopping. She felt it, the absence of attention. It was familiar, helpful, even. She continued walking, hands folded loosely around a tablet, posture relaxed. To him, she was part of the background noise of the hospital, interchangeable with every other person in scrubs. He spoke to security in a low voice, flashing credentials. Routine assignment, protective detail, maybe, or oversight. Either way, his focus stayed forward, on threats that announced themselves. The nurse paused near a supply closet and pretended to review inventory. In the reflective surface of a stainless steel cabinet, she watched the agent's reflection instead. He stood too close to the doors, leaving his back exposed to the hallway. He trusted the uniforms around him. He trusted the setting. Hospitals felt controlled to people like him. Regulated. Safe by design. A monitor beeped irregularly down the hall. Not loud enough to draw attention yet. The nurse's head turned before her body did. The sound was out of pattern. She closed the cabinet and walked toward it, passing a housekeeping cart parked partially in the corridor. The cart shouldn't have been there at this hour. Environmental Services had finished this wing an hour earlier. She noted the placement of the wheels, the way the trash bag bulged unevenly, and kept walking. Inside the patient room, the beeping resolved into a simple sensor error. She corrected it with two practiced movements and rested her hand briefly on the bed rail. The patient slept on, unaware. As she stepped back into the hallway, voices rose near the elevators. The stretcher from earlier was returning, empty now. Too fast. The nurse's gaze lifted to the ceiling, tracing the line of cameras she knew by heart. One was angled slightly wrong, just enough to miss a section of floor near the fire doors. Maintenance had logged it weeks ago. It hadn't been fixed. She adjusted her path to cross through that blind spot, watching reflections instead of faces. Her pulse stayed even. This was not fear. It was alignment. Small things were beginning to stack, not enough to alarm anyone whose job was to wait for alarms. Enough for her. The agent laughed briefly at something a security guard said. The sound carried farther than it should have. The nurse stopped at a medication cart and began organizing vials that did not need organizing. She listened. Somewhere deeper in the wing, a door opened and closed with deliberate care. Not the careless swing of staff in a hurry. Something controlled, considered. A young nurse hurried past her, whispering about a system glitch in radiology. Orders delayed, screens freezing. Annoying, but not catastrophic. The nurse acknowledged her with a nod. Systems failed all the time, but they rarely failed in isolation. She picked up her tablet and walked toward the agent, stopping several feet short, as if waiting for permission that never came. He didn't look at her. She didn't force it. Instead, she adjusted her route at the last second, angling away, creating a small pocket of space in the hallway. Two visitors followed her without realizing why, guided by nothing more than her body language and the calm certainty of her movement. The hospital continued its noise. Phones rang. Someone called for transport. A code team passed on a different floor. Normal by all visible measures. The agent checked his watch. He believed he had time. The nurse stood at the intersection of 3 corridors and let her eyes move once more, slow and deliberate. The pieces were not complete yet, but the outline was there. Whatever was coming had already arrived. It was inside the building, moving under cover of normal operations, relying on the same assumptions everyone else did. She adjusted her badge, smoothed her sleeves, and took one quiet step to the side, out of the main flow. No one noticed. No one needed to. Not yet. The first assumption had already been made, and it was working in her favor. The hospital's rhythm cracked first in small ways. Doors left ajar, screens flickering, phones ringing without response. To anyone else, these were minor inconveniences, the kind of glitches that night staff had learned to ignore. But the nurse recognized the pattern instantly. Each anomaly lined up too neatly, creating corridors of opportunity that should not exist. She slowed her steps, letting the empty stretch of hallway speak to her in silence. Somewhere behind her, the agent moved as if in a protective bubble, unaware that the bubble had already been penetrated. The threat arrived disguised as a delivery contractor, uniform crisp, badge official-looking, clipboard in hand. They moved carefully, checking each floor plan, watching staff like a quiet predator studying prey. Security glanced briefly but dismissed the person with a nod. There was no reason to suspect anything. They always trusted appearances, and the agent trusted protocol. The nurse's eyes followed the figure in reflection, noting each step, each pause. She did not speak. She did not signal. She only observed, cataloging small deviations, a gloved hand that lingered over a lock, shoes that scuffed in an unnatural rhythm, eyes scanning beyond the immediate task. She moved closer to the nurse's station under the guise of checking charts, positioning herself along a line that intersected the intruder's path. Her presence alone created subtle control. Visitors moved around her, carts shifted, the path of the intruder narrowed without any words. The agent, distracted by the elevators and the movement of staff, failed to notice. This allowed the intruder free access to the main hall, just wide enough to test the building's response to movement, but not enough to trigger alarm. A sudden alarm on the far end of the wing drew staff attention. The agent pivoted, moving toward the noise, believing it to be the real threat. The intruder, unchallenged, continued along a secondary corridor, examining access points. The nurse adjusted her course, guiding another visitor quietly behind her, shielding them without any outward indication of concern. Each step she took subtly blocked potential approaches, directed the flow of movement, and kept the intruder contained in a space that offered no cover. Then came the first direct risk. A door to the supply closet clicked open unexpectedly. The intruder's hand lingered on the handle. The nurse approached without haste, letting the glint of fluorescent light reveal her silhouette in the reflective surface of the door. She didn't speak. She didn't confront. She waited, a single presence of quiet authority, so precise in timing that the intruder hesitated. 1 second of hesitation in a place where every second counted. The agent returned, now noticing the subtle shift in the hallway. Something was off. Staff whispered to one another, confusion mounting, but the nurse's movements were deliberate, organized. She guided 3 visitors to a safer corridor, stepping into their line of sight at just the right moment. They followed without question, trusting the rhythm of her body over the words of any authority around them. The intruder paused, glanced around, and tried a secondary route. The nurse anticipated it, stepping to intersect the path. She didn't block aggressively, she simply existed in the line of movement, forcing micro-adjustments in the intruder's approach. Each adjustment delayed their progress, creating seconds that multiplied into critical windows. The agent finally looked up, his eyes widening slightly as he saw the subtle choreography. Too late to intervene. The nurse had already absorbed the first wave of risk, diverting potential casualties without so much as a raised voice. He realized, with a growing sense of unease, that someone else was orchestrating the situation, someone he had assumed to be irrelevant. In the quiet between alarms, the nurse took a moment to evaluate. The intruder had tested the building's defenses and found a gap, but her interventions had turned that gap into a narrow corridor of control. She had bought time without exposing herself, without drawing attention. The cost, as always, was invisible. No recognition would come, no thanks recorded. But the hall was no longer uncontrolled, and for now, the threat had been slowed, contained. Not stopped, but delayed just enough. She moved to a corner and crouched slightly to check the path of a cart left near an intersection. The placement seemed incidental, but the pattern was deliberate. Whoever had moved it intended to create confusion, a distraction. She corrected it, aligning it with the hallway's natural flow, simple, quiet, unnoticed. And yet, in the precision of that act, the agent's misplaced confidence began to fracture. The night pressed on, and the hospital continued to pulse with life, unaware of the intruder moving silently within. The nurse remained in motion, guiding, containing, observing. Her presence a calm barrier between ordinary chaos and extraordinary danger. Each decision was measured, every step deliberate, every movement a silent declaration. They were wrong to underestimate her. The threat was here, the stakes had escalated, and the nurse had already begun her silent countermeasures. The agent had only begun to realize what was happening, but it would take more than realization to regain control. The intruder had begun testing the boundaries, moving faster, probing doors and exits with a careful hand. The hospital, once orderly, now felt unpredictable. The nurse adjusted her steps, walking just ahead of the main flow of traffic, her eyes scanning intersections and shadowed corners. Each movement was deliberate, nothing flashy, nothing loud, yet each step shifted the environment in her favor. Visitors and staff moved around her without awareness, guided by instinct rather than instruction. She did not need to speak. She merely existed in the right place at the right time, a human fulcrum redirecting potential hazards. She noticed the agent, still behind the main stretch of the corridor, now alert, but reactive rather than proactive. He glanced at her once, saw her calm composure, and dismissed it. He assumed she was performing standard duties. He did not yet understand that every small adjustment she made was calculated, a tactical maneuver in real time. She could feel the subtle imbalance of the intruder's path, the slight hesitation in their gait, the way they avoided certain cameras, the way they were funneling themselves unknowingly toward her. She allowed it. Let them move exactly where she wanted. At a key intersection near the emergency wing, she positioned herself near a medication cart, adjusting its alignment to block the intruder's immediate path. The person's eyes flicked briefly toward the obstruction, but there was no hesitation in her body language to challenge them. The nurse moved as if she belonged there. Ordinary, unremarkable, unthreatening. The intruder's rhythm faltered. A second later, they veered slightly off course, drawn into a narrower corridor. Every step she had taken, every adjustment to her environment, funneled the threat into a containment zone with no explosive confrontation, no alarm triggered. A patient transport team appeared from a side hallway, pushing a gurney. The nurse stepped into position, placing herself between the intruder and the moving cart. The agent noticed this intervention now, his eyes widening as the implications became clear. The nurse was not reacting randomly. She was orchestrating the environment. She guided the transport team past the intruder, her hand lightly indicating the safe path, her voice quiet enough to be barely heard. No one questioned her authority. No one even realized it existed. She anticipated the intruder's next move, noting a secondary access door that could provide an escape route. Without hesitation, she moved to intercept, placing herself in the optimal angle of observation and influence. The intruder slowed, hesitating slightly as they recalculated. Every movement the nurse made was subtle, almost invisible, yet it exerted absolute control. She did not touch them, did not threaten, did not raise her voice. The hall responded to her presence as if obeying unspoken rules. Meanwhile, the agent attempted to redirect staff toward the source of minor alarms, only to find that the nurse had already isolated the potential risk zone. He recognized belatedly that the intruder's path had been shaped entirely without his input. The quiet competence of the nurse forced him to confront the reality that his assumptions had been flawed from the start. She had converted ordinary hospital equipment, carts, doors, lines of sight, into tools of containment. She had done it with calm, precision, and no fanfare. A small misstep, a slightly open door, a cart not fully aligned, would have been disastrous, but she corrected it before it could create opportunity. She felt the weight of her choices in the microseconds of calculation. 1 second too slow could allow the intruder to access an unmonitored corridor. 1 second too fast might reveal her awareness prematurely. Each adjustment carried cost, even if invisible to others. By the time the intruder reached the corridor's end, they were effectively funneled into a space the nurse had prepared. Security barriers were in place, personnel were subtly redirected, and critical exits were monitored indirectly. The agent finally arrived at her side, scanning the area with mounting unease. His gaze lingered on her calm, methodical presence. He saw the result of her quiet control, but could not yet grasp the depth of her authority. The nurse allowed herself a fraction of a pause, evaluating the containment. Her mind calculated the next steps, the potential for escalation, the sacrifices required. This was far from over, but for now, the hall was cleared of immediate danger. The intruder had been slowed, maneuvered into a narrow path, and observed without any confrontation. The cost had been her invisibility. She had acted entirely without recognition. She adjusted her badge and returned to the flow of staff and visitors, moving with ordinary purpose while holding the hall in unseen command. The agent finally looked at her, suspicion and curiosity mingling in his eyes. She did not meet it directly, choosing instead to focus on the space ahead, on the corridors she knew intimately. Every step was a quiet assertion. The hospital's safety rested in her hands, though no one would ever formally acknowledge it. The corridor had narrowed to a tense stillness. The intruder's movements had slowed under the nurse's quiet control, but the threat remained real. Every second was measured, every decision weighted with consequences. She could see the agent now fully aware, scanning the hall, yet paralyzed by the realization that the situation was not under his command. He would intervene too late if he acted on instinct alone. She had already calculated the risks, the only viable choices, exposure or containment. A delivery door clicked open just ahead, revealing the intruder's hand as it hovered over the lock panel. The nurse stepped forward, not aggressively, but with purpose. The agent's voice called out, a late attempt to assert control, but she ignored it. Speaking would announce her strategy, reveal her awareness, and compromise the carefully crafted advantage. Instead, she used subtle movement, adjusting her body angle to block the intruder's line to the exit. Her presence alone redirected the path, forcing the intruder to pause. Seconds stretched. Her mind raced through contingencies. Isolate, distract, delay. Every option carried cost. She could create a scene and alert security, but that would expose her identity, possibly endanger herself, and risk the intruder's retaliation. She could continue guiding the intruder indirectly, but it meant holding herself in that corridor longer than was safe. Each choice carried moral weight. Every delayed response might save some, yet endanger others. She chose the quieter path, control through subtlety, at personal risk. She reached a maintenance closet along the corridor and used it to manipulate the environment. A cart shifted imperceptibly, a door was nudged just enough to create a barrier. The intruder hesitated again, recalculating their route. No one else noticed these movements. Staff were still rushing patients, visitors moved uncertainly, and the agent scanned distractedly. Yet the nurse was fully exposed, fully aware that she was drawing attention from the intruder. She had no shield other than her calm and her knowledge of the building. Moments later, a visitor wandered into the corridor, lost and panicked. Without thinking, she moved to intercept, guiding them with small gestures and slight body positioning. The agent noticed finally the orchestration, but could only watch. He understood the competence, but could not replicate it without disrupting the carefully maintained flow. The nurse had assumed responsibility for everyone in that space, staff, visitors, patients, while maintaining her cover as a simple nurse. A sudden shift. The intruder reached for a fire exit door, potentially opening a pathway into a less monitored section of the hospital. The nurse's pulse remained steady. She moved to block the line of access, standing in plain view but unassuming. She whispered directions to a nearby staff member, redirecting them subtly without drawing attention to herself. The intruder paused, evaluating, then altered course slightly, unknowingly contained. In the process, the nurse sustained minor injuries, a scrape from the edge of a cart, a bruised shoulder from subtly pushing a visitor out of harm's way, but she did not acknowledge them. She could not afford to pause, could not afford the spotlight. Every adjustment carried personal cost, yet she maintained restraint. Her authority was expressed not in force, not in words, but in the quiet precision of her actions. The intruder was funneled deeper into a monitored corridor, delayed, observed, yet unaware of the orchestrator behind it all. The agent approached, eyes wide, a mixture of respect and disbelief forming. He could see the outcome, but not the invisible labor, the mental calculation, the moral choices made in silence. Recognition would never come officially. Reports would attribute the containment to security protocols or standard procedures. The nurse would remain the unnoticed hand guiding the situation, absorbing risk without reward. The hallway's tension finally eased. The intruder's progress slowed enough for security to converge from another wing. The nurse stepped aside, blending into the background again. Her body carried the minor evidence of exertion. Her mind cataloged every action, every delay, every life she had protected without acknowledgement. The agent's gaze lingered on her for a brief moment, understanding dawning, but she did not meet it. Her choice had been made. Containment over recognition, silence over applause. The crisis had escalated, the moral stakes had been fully realized, and the cost had been paid in quiet ways. The nurse returned to her ordinary duties as though nothing had happened, yet the hospital's safety had been preserved through her subtle authority. No one else would know the full extent. She did not need them to. The hospital exhaled slowly. The alarms had ceased, the intruder was contained, and the corridors, once tense with uncertainty, returned to their usual hum of activity. Nurses, orderlies, and security personnel moved as if nothing extraordinary had occurred. The agent lingered near the intersection, reviewing notes, still processing the events, his eyes occasionally flicking toward the nurse. She stood at a distance, adjusting an IV line, her expression calm, as if she had never left her routine. She did not seek his attention, did not offer explanation, and he did not demand it. Recognition in this place was fleeting, often non-existent, and she had long accepted it. Reports were being typed, radio channels crackled, and a fresh wave of patients arrived. The intruder's attempts were already being logged as minor incidents, procedural anomalies to be addressed in policy updates. None of the documentation would acknowledge the silent orchestration that had kept the hall safe. The nurse moved methodically from patient to patient, checking monitors, straightening blankets, and recording notes with the same quiet precision she had maintained throughout the night. Her presence exuded competence, but it was subtle, almost invisible. The agent watched her briefly from across the hall, then turned to confer with security. He understood at last that the nurse had been the unseen force controlling the chaos, but his understanding came too late to alter the official narrative. She had contained the threat, guided the flow of people, and maintained the safety of the hospital with restraint and discretion. Every action had been measured, every intervention invisible to the untrained eye. She had paid the cost in fatigue, in minor injuries, and in personal sacrifice, yet she remained in the background, uncelebrated, unnoticed. She paused for a moment at the nurse's station, glancing at the monitors. Everything was normal again, or as normal as it could be in a place where emergencies were constant. The hum of life in the hospital continued, indifferent to the night's near disaster. She made a few notes, adjusted the settings on a monitor, and moved on. No one asked for her account. No one praised her intervention. She did not expect it. Her satisfaction came from a different source, the quiet knowledge that the hall was safe, that she had done her job, and that she had done it well. As the first light of dawn began to seep through the windows of the emergency wing, the nurse continued her rounds, routine tasks blending seamlessly into the background. The agent had moved on to debriefs and protocols, the intruder was removed from the premises, and life in the hospital appeared unchanged. But the corridors bore a subtle order, a shape imposed by unseen hands, a calm that had been restored without spectacle or applause. The nurse walked steadily through the hall, every step measured, every movement deliberate, carrying the weight of the night silently, fully, and alone. The crisis had passed. The hospital remained standing, intact, unaware of how close it had come to unraveling. The nurse returned to her station, settled into her duties, and let the ordinary rhythm of the hospital reclaim her. Recognition was absent, but the quiet authority she had wielded lingered in the spaces she had controlled. She had cleared the hall, contained the threat, and absorbed the cost, all without stepping into the spotlight. The night ended as it had begun, in motion, in quiet competence, in the calm aftermath of restraint. The hall was quiet, and she remained, as always, unseen but in control.